Hey everybody, welcome back to Christian Penguin Night tonight. My name is Matthew. In this video, we're still continuing with the creation versus evolutionism, and like I said, we're going to be covering the radiocarbon dating in more detail. You can tell I'm from the South, more detail, but more detail in this video. First, the Carbon-14 cycle, and who actually discovered it, or who started it. Actually, it was started by Willard. I always want to say William when I say his name. Willard Libby, back in 1946. And basically, his process is the cosmic rays enter the atmosphere. Sorry, I keep having to look at my notes, make sure I get it right. Cosmic rays enter the atmosphere from outer space, strike the Earth, transform nitrogen-14 or common nitrogen, or regular nitrogen, however you want to look at it, to radioactive carbon, or C14. And carbon-14 is believed to have the half-life of 5,730 years, and I'll explain that later why I say believed. And this is called the C14 dating, carbon-14 dating, or radiocarbon dating. Okay. And within 12 minutes after being struck by cosmic rays in the upper atmosphere, the carbon-14 combines with oxygen to become carbon dioxide with carbon-14 in it. It then diffuses throughout the atmosphere and absorbed by the vegetation, which of course we and the other animals eat, and so on. And every living thing has carbon in it, and the more we intake, of course, the higher count. And at death, continues on with the decay. So once you die, the carbon-14 in your body still decays at the same decay rate that they say is at 5,730 years. Now, I did mention a good while ago, I think in one of my other videos, but I'll go over it one more time in this one. For whenever you hear me talk about a half-life, for people that might just be coming into the videos and don't really, or not fresh out of college or high school, or not familiar with it from science class, the half-life is, at that point, it loses half of its material. So C14 at 5,730 years, they believe it loses over half of its carbon. It loses half the material. And after another 5,730 years, it loses another half. And then it loses another half, and you always lose a half. Okay, so that's the half-life. So Libby's method for counting this was with a Geiger counter clicks per minute per gram of dead material. And that's, in a nutshell, what Libby started with the C14 dating. And at that time, it was a big breakthrough. It was going to be the greatest thing in science for helping with dating. But we're going to go over some problems with it and some assumptions, like always. One of the biggest things that people will not admit to with any dating method, and I've said it several times already in my other videos when dealing with dating, is that most dates are tossed. They are just tossed out. Because if they do not agree with their model, with their time, with how old they think the Earth is, how old they think a dinosaur is, or whatever, that date's tossed. But you don't hear about that. They can take a dinosaur bone and send it to, say, 12 different radiocarbon dating labs. I don't know how many there actually are, but I'm just saying 12. And let's say they send it to 12. The first one gets 5,000 years. This one gets 10. This one gets 150, this one gets 1 million, this one gets 60 million, and so the final one gets 60.5 million. Well, which one are you going to hear about? This dinosaur bone is 60.5 million years. And they're not going to tell you about the other dates. Why? Because they tossed them out. They don't agree with, a honest scientist. Does not matter if it's a creationist or an evolutionist. An honest scientist will tell you all the dates. If they test it 100 times, they should have a spreadsheet saying who conducted the test, how it was done, how many times they rechecked the results, and how the date span was for that test. If their date span was over 1,000 years between this date and that date, then they should say, we had a date of 1,000 years and 2,000 years. Here is our gap. Here's our error. 1 plus or minus 1,000 years. Okay. Now, if they had a date of 5,000 years and then a date of 1 million years, and that was their final result, and that was the gap between the smallest and the largest, That's a big gap. But they're not going to tell you that error because they toss out the dates that they don't agree with. And likewise, yes, there's creationists that do the same thing. Excuse me. But like I said, what you need to do is present all the material honestly. If you run a date test on anything and you date it, say, like I said, 100 times, you need to have a spreadsheet that shows all 100 tests and each date you got with each test and how the test was done with a link to notes on how you did the test and what led to you getting that date. You need to do that. That's just honesty. But if you creationist side, let's say one of your test results in 100,000 years, but all your others are under 10,000. Okay, well, that's not really tossing one date because you did 100 tests and one was 100,000 years, but 99 was under 10,000 years. Let's say they all range between 4 and 5,000 years. But you just had that one outlier. That's fine. Evolution side, even though I don't believe in the millions and billions of years, but if you did 100 tests and you kept getting with a dinosaur bone to say, which with carbon you can't go past a certain amount of time anyway, but let's say, okay, you get one that's 50,000 years and then all your others 99 or 60 million. Okay, I don't mind you tossing out the one, but when you have a different date every single test and you only use the one that you agree with, like I said, it doesn't matter if the creationist or the evolutionist, that's wrong. So don't do it. Quit it. Be honest. Anyway, but yeah, so all other dates are tossed. They only use the ones that they agree with. Okay, so now we're going to go over the main 13 assumptions that they are using when it comes to carbon-14 dating. Okay. Number one, atmospheric carbon, and like I said, these are assumptions, so you're going to hear me say millions of years and so on. I am not agreeing with it. I'm just saying this is what they are assuming. Atmospheric carbon, for the past several million years by their calendar, the air around us has had the same amount of atmospheric carbon that it has now. So in other words, it always has this amount. Nothing changed. Don't worry about it. Oceanic carbon. Whoops, lost my spot in my notes. During this time, the very large amount of oceanic carbon has stayed the same as well. There's been no change. Cosmic rays have always reached the Earth, but in the same amount. The amount has never changed. So in other words, there wasn't one year where we got bombarded with billions of cosmic rays versus a million. They're just assuming that. They don't know that. There could have been multiple times where that happened and changed the dates and so on. But like I said, that's an assumption. Lost my spot. The balance of the rates. Okay, both the rate of formation and the rate of decay have remained the same. So in balance, excuse me. So it forms at the same rate and it decays at the same rate. Nothing will change it. And the reason that's an important assumption is if, let's say, it forms very slowly but decays very quickly, well, that's going to throw you off. It's vice versa. So they have to assume, that's a big word, assume, that it stayed the same. The decay rate, of course, has never changed like all the others. They say, nope, it's never changed, nothing can change it. Which actually, yes, several things can change it. There's been no contamination. In other words, nothing has contaminated the specimen, like adding carbon or causing it to somehow lose carbon faster than what it should lose it as by changing the decay rate and so on. Which, of course, would go into seepage. Like water is a factor that can actually take away or even add carbon in some cases, which they've proven with scientific studies. But they're assuming there's been no change, there's been no seepage that has added or taken away. Like I said, that kind of goes in with number 6. Number 8, the amount of carbon at death. Now this one is one of the important ones. The fraction of carbon-14, and I wrote the whole thing out that they gave a description for, which the living thing possessed at death, they believe they know today. When the thing died, they are assuming they know the amount that was in it today. But yet it's supposed to be millions of years old. How do you know the amount of carbon that was in something millions of years ago? You don't. It's an assumption. It's your interpretation. Oh yeah, it must have had this much. No, you don't know. The half-life. Okay. Going back to the half-life. Now the reason I say it is assumed the half-life is constant at 5,730 years. It's because, like I said, stuff can change the decay rate. That's true. But nobody lives 5,730 years or older. And the reason I bring that up is because you would actually have to have somebody sitting there. Okay, it lost this much, lost this much. At 5,000, be an old geezer sitting there. It lost exactly this much at 5,730 years. Here's all our ones that we tested. They lost the same amount. We're good. No, they don't. Here's what they do. For any that have an amount you cannot test, like I can't take, let's say, rubidium and get its half-life because it's in the millions of years or whatever, because I don't live a million years. So here's what they do. They will take it, measure it for 5, 10 years, whatever, a certain amount, and they'll be like, okay, now we're going to use a formula, assuming that decay rate stays the same no matter what. But like I said, we've already shown that in other videos, stuff can change the decay rate to faster or slower. But they're making an assumption that nothing changes the decay rate. They put in their little calculation, yep, its decay rate or half-life is this. That's how they find it. And no, that's, to me, I'm sorry, that's not good science. If I had to calculate that far into the future to tell somebody a half-life of something, no. I tell them, sorry, we can't use that for dating. There's nothing I can do to show that half-life is constant in today's standards. That's just honesty. But that's what they go by. Atmospheric nitrogen. In other words, nitrogen that is a precursor to the carbon has always been constant as well. So that's what they're saying kind of stabilizes it out, where the nitrogen's always been the same, the carbon's always been the same because of the change. That's just an assumption. Instrumentation and analysis. Now this is an assumption that there's been no instrument error or human error, basically. And it pretty much says so. The instrumentation is precise, working properly. Analytic methods are always carefully done. In other words, no human has made a mistake in their dating. Okay, instruments fail, humans will fail. We are not perfect. We will make a mistake. Admitting we made the mistake is what is the problem. A lot of them will never admit they made the mistake. And a lot of people don't want to admit that. Uniform results. Technique always yields the same result no matter what, on the same sample. Or related samples are obviously part of the same larger sample. So in other words, if they take samples from the same area, that's all part of one large sample, so therefore it's all going to be the same no matter what. So they might take 50 samples in, say, a 50 square foot area, but let's say that's on top of a mountain somewhere in the Grand Canyon. Okay, well, this is obviously all part of the same rock. This is part of this mountain, so therefore we only need to test one. So they'll put the others aside until they might need them later or something, but they won't test them at that time. And you might have one give you a completely different date. You never know. It's just an assumption. And yes, they have done that. The magnetic field was the same in the past as it was today. However, we went over that briefly already. The magnetic field is getting weaker, which means at one point it was stronger. And if you go by the calculation for its decline in its strength, when it was stronger, it was so strong that life couldn't have existed at 20 to 25,000 years. So that throws out the billions of years that things have lived here. So that's the problem with that. See if I have any other notes that I need to cover real quick. Other than, yeah, that's a lot of ifs. For the longest time, people were taught that actual historical records for events that occurred in history, which have been proven, went back 20,000 years. They were astonished to find out it only went back to about 4,000 or 5,000 BC, which goes right in line with the flood in the Bible. And is that all my notes on that page? Yeah, okay. Want to make sure I covered everything. Okay, now. This is the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of this video. These are the 16 radiocarbon dating problems. In other words, these are the problems with the carbon dating method. Number one, the type of carbon. Uncertainties regarding the type of carbon may be in a given sample causes significant errors in the dating. So in other words, if you have C14 but there's another kind of carbon that might be in there or whatever, but it's so similar you can't tell, then you're dating the wrong carbon, and that could lead to problems. But because also after death, additional radioactive carbon can be added to a specimen by contamination and so on, and that's what also goes with that. Variations within the same sample is another problem. Part of the sample tests one way while the other part tests another way. If you've watched the seminar videos that I have way earlier when I started the channel, I was uploading them. You have some from Kent Hovind, you have some from Billy Crone, and other prominent creationists in the area. They will give you examples of where they might tested the say the trunk hair of a mammoth and tested the backside, for a proper term, backside, or tail hair, area, and the trunk will test at 20,000 years, but the tail would test at 50,000 years. So that's a long birth process. And I mean, there's way more examples of even testing live specimens, and they would, I know the one about the seashells, but I think there's something wrong with that, so I'm not going to mention that one again. And when I say what's wrong with that, I think there's something wrong on both sides of how they did that test. There was another one. They tested a seal. I can't remember if it was a live seal that just died. In other words, right when it died, they took a sample, or if it had only been dead for about 1 or 2 years, and then they took a sample. But anyway, they knew the exact time of death. And so they went and tested it, and they got like the seal was 30,000 years or something like that. It's been a while since I've seen that example in seminars. But yeah, so they've had multiple tests where it's been proven not to work, even on the same sample, that they take it from the front back and they'll get 2 separate dates. Lost my spot. Loss of carbon-14. Rainfall, lakes, oceans, and below ground moisture will cause a loss of carbon-14. In other words, water can cause a huge amount of carbon-14 in certain areas to leave. So in other words, like if you die and your body falls into a river or lake, gets, say, wedged under a rock, and as it decays, it's of course going to be releasing the carbon-14 and so on, but the river's flowing. So it's also adding to getting rid of the carbon-14 along with the regular decay rate. So in other words, let's say you're losing 3 times the amount of carbon versus the regular rate if nothing was contaminating you or whatever. So it can affect the change, which would of course affect the date. Changes in the atmospheric carbon. It is assumed, like we said earlier, that the carbon in the atmosphere has always been the same. What if it wasn't? What if there was more? What if there was less? And that's what there are people in the creation side openly admit. We don't know what it was like in the past. And we'll say we're the good creationists is what I should say. The good creationists will not make fun of somebody who believes in evolutionism, but what they will say is we openly cannot say how much carbon was in the past. We can't. However, they will tell you that for their calculations to work, the amount of carbon has always been the same. And that's the honest truth. But yet, evolutionists, some of them, not all of them, but some of them will get very angry when you tell people that. And I sit here, I'm like, why are you so angry? It's just the honest truth. I mean, why are you so mad about it? And it's just an assumption. That's all we're saying. But see, they don't want us to admit it's an assumption to people on their part, because they're telling, nope, it's true science. No, it's not. It's assuming. Never assume. Sunspot effects on carbon-14 production. They're saying that the sun spots from the sun can cause major effects. There goes my southern draw again. Can cause major effects to decay rates and the production of carbon-14 in the atmosphere, which they've studied from. Let's see. I have my dates here somewhere. Through checking back, they believe they found variations from 1420 to 1530 AD, from 1639 to 1720. So, in other words, in the past, the sunspots have drastically changed the effect of how the carbon is made and so on. And they are saying that. Wait a minute, did I write down a journal for that one? Darn. I don't think I wrote down the journal entry for that. Okay. Sorry. I'll try and find it and add it to the description below if I can. Radiocarbon date survey. Radiocarbon dating continually yields dates that are millions or even billions of years younger than those obtained by other radio dating techniques. So remember, many of them that are stout evolutionists will tell you the dating methods cross-check each other. Well, if carbon-14 can only go up to, say, 40 or 50,000 years by their calendar, then how can you use it to say a dinosaur bone is 65 million years? The answer is you can't. So then that's when they revert to, well, the sediment that it should have been found in is from Cretaceous, which is umpteen million years, therefore that's all the dinosaur is. That's an assumption, because they don't want dinosaurs to be young, because by creation standards everything lived at the same exact time. They're in the Garden of Eden, then the fallout, and then most of it was killed off by the flood. Then it was starting to be reproduced back into the wild after the flood, off Noah's Ark and so on, because a lot of it would start pointing back to creation being true and not evolutionism, and they can't have that, so a lot of them just cover it up. They won't tell you. Change into neutrino radiation. Now, the neutrino radiation change would also affect radiocarbon levels, the production, and the decay rates. I didn't really write too much on that one because I couldn't really find too much other than that, basically. The amount of cosmic rays would, of course, change it. If we had more, there would be a drastic change in the creation of C14. I already discussed the magnetic field. Let's see. The moisture condition, atmospheric changes in the moisture content in the past could also drastically affect the C14 amount. In other words, it could make it have way more C14 than they thought. Then, let's say today there's 1 million parts per million of C14 in the atmosphere, but if this caused more, then say back in the past there might have been 1 billion parts per million C14 in the atmosphere, which will drastically change your clock dates. And that's what that's saying. If warmer or more water vapor, so if warmer water or warmer water vapor or more water vapor was to be in the atmosphere at the time, it would also drastically change the clocks, the production rates, and so on. C14 clocks would register long ages of time prior to 2000 BC if this were the case. So in other words, because of the heavy moisture and so on, C14 would give you very strange dates, like 30,000 years or something out, because it would drastically change it by adding so much C14. Dramatic changes after the flood. Now, here's where a lot of people are going to get, but got to go over it. Because of the dramatic changes worldwide after the flood, dealing with plants, animals, and people in the early centuries after the flood would have received much less C14 than they would have received today. This would make those earlier life forms and civilizations appear to be much older. So in other words, if you received a lot less C14 because you don't have that much compared to the atmosphere as it is today, you would seem to be older. So if, let's say I only have 1,000 parts per million in me, and the atmosphere has 100,000 parts per million, then and you start measuring and everything, then like, well, he only has 1,000 parts per million, so therefore he's gone through this many half-lives, so he's umpteen million years old, and yet I died yesterday. That's what it's saying. If you have less in your body, they automatically assume you've gone through this many half-lives compared to the atmosphere, and it's wrong. but that's what happens. Recent dates are more accurate. It is well known with C14 dates going back about 2,600 years tend to be pretty accurate. But prior to about 600 BC, the dates given by radiocarbon analysis begin lengthening out excessively. So in other words, they're saying about 600 BC, further past than that, like the 700, 800, so on, you're going to get extreme dates that may not be accurate. Anything less than that, they can kind of give some pretty good accuracy, is what they're saying. Even modern specimens are inaccurate. It's surprising. It is actually a very surprising fact that even specimens from recent centuries show serious problems in the dates given when they have been tested. And like I was telling you, some of the ones like they just died and they tested it. Well, according to the test, it's 30,000 years old, but yet it died 2 days ago, stuff like that. And it gives a different list of things. Carbon inventory. World Carbon Inventory, which was done by W.A. Reiners, Reiners, reveals that the total amount of carbon in the world today is less than 1/500th of the total amount that is locked into fossil plants and animals within sedimentary rocks. Okay. It goes on. An enormous amount of carbon was buried at the time of the catastrophe of the flood. If the same world inventory of carbon-14 were distributed in the pre-flood biosphere with living plants and animals, the C14 level would have been 500 times as much as the amount we see today. So, in other words, if the amount of C14 exists today, that same activity was back then, you would see 500 times more today than what we actually have, is what it's saying. And it also shows that this alone would throw off the account for 9 C14 half-lives, or around 51,000 years. Throwing off the clock. And that should be that's pretty much close to the end. Okay, throwing off the C14 clock. Libby, developer of this dating method, found a serious discrepancy at a certain point in past history that indicated his assumed buildup of terrestrial radiocarbon was inaccurate. So in other words, he got to this point and he's like, well, wait a minute, I've got a huge error right here. Is what that's saying. The catastrophic effects of the flood would account for this discrepancy. Keep in mind, however, before the flood, a vast vapor canopy was in the atmosphere, which would tend to shield the Earth from radiocarbon buildup. So prior to 1600 BC, or that's when a lot of people, or most people say is when the flood happened, radio dating tends to go crazy because of the buildup. I think it's a little bit further back. I think it's like, well, see, I'm one of those that it's Earth's more around 8,000 years, closer to that. But if you go by 6,000 years, the flood, I think they say was around 4,000 or so BC, and then go on. So if you do the 8,000, it's closer to 6,000. So I think it's further back. C14 data actually can point to the flood. Let's see. And the reason they say that is because if you go by the radiocarbon age in years, by death dates graph, it actually shows a let's see. It actually shows a big spike and then kind of curves back up. And they're showing that after 7,000 years or so is when that spike went up and then came back down, and then it started slowly going back up again. So they're trying to say that, I'm telling you, my southern draw's coming out in these videos. They're trying to say that would point to at that point when all the deaths just peaked, like a ton of deaths happened, over 25,000 deaths or so, or more. That is when the flood occurred, or around that time frame. That's what they're trying to say. Two side notes. There wasn't much on them. Mass spectrometer is something that is hardly brought up. But if its conclusions were accepted, all fossils, coal, petroleum, and ancient man or hominid bones would be dated less than 5,000 years, according to that method. There's a good lesson we can learn from Jarmo. Jarmo was a civilized or a village that was inhabited for about 500 years, give or take. It was discovered in Iraq, and they did 11 different C14 tests there, and all the dates like I said, this is good science here, in my opinion, is they showed that here was the smallest date, here was the oldest date, and the date gap or error was 6,000 years. So your plus or minus is 6,000 years. That's a pretty big gap for your plus or minus. And to me, if you get anything over, I'd say 150 years, maybe somewhere in there. That's just me. That's my personal take. If I date something multiple times and my error is over 150 years, I'm not going to use the dates. Not because it's not sticking with my viewpoint, but it's saying, hey, if I'm doing a date at this and let's say I did a date and I got 300 years. Okay, I started doing another. I was like, okay, let me test it 100 times to make sure I got it right. And out of that 100 times from the initial date, so actually I did 101 tests, 99 of those were within 150 years or less. So that tells me, that's pretty close. But then I had that, like I said earlier, then I had that one outlier, like 10,000 years. Well, okay, I'm not going to use the 10,000 year one. However, it's not because it doesn't fit my viewpoint, it's because it doesn't match the test dates. In other words, all my test dates but one were within a certain amount. So I could use it. Except for the one that was just far out there, that one I'm going to toss because obviously I did something wrong. But now if I do 100 different tests and only 2 of the other tests were within 150 and all the rest were way out there and not even close, I would have to toss those, but then I would have to say, I'm sorry, I cannot give you an accurate date because all my dates had a huge error gap, and I apologize, but I can't give you an accurate date. So I would assume, big word in science is assume, that it is possible it came from this dating time. I mean, this would all be in the paper written up. It is possible, to my belief. I mean, I would put everything in there saying that this is not a fact. This is just what I believe of when it dates or when it could be dated to. But my dates do not match what I believe. I'm sorry, I cannot give you an accurate date. That's just honest science. Any creationist, any evolutionist would have to agree. That's just honest science. But both sides will have people that, nope, we're going to go with the one that fits ours. So, unfortunately, that's on both sides. There's not much you can do about it. That pretty much ends our coverage of the C14. Sorry if you watched my day 12 Why Pray video, I kind of went over. I've been sick for the past several weeks. Really bad. Been fighting off this chest congestion cold. Which, if you notice, there seems to be some skips in my videos from day 12 and this one. I had to edit out where I coughed really bad and cleared my throat and so on because of the cold. And that's why there's skips. Because I didn't want to do a video just have me coughing the whole time. So I took the coughs out. But because of that, then I had a virus that I hardly could keep anything down. If I ate anything, I had to, within 2 hours, I had to run and get to a trash can or a toilet. So it's been rough for the past 2 to 3 weeks. I've gotten over the virus. I'm in the final stages, hopefully, of getting over this chest cold. And then I won't have to worry about editing videos. And then once I'm over it, I won't have to worry about editing the videos so it looks like I cut something out. Which, like I said, what I'm cutting out is my coughs. Because I really don't think anybody wants to sit there and see me coughing. But anyway, so I'm going to end the video there. Please join us next time for our next creation versus evolutionism video. And we will cover amino acid dating. Until next time, guys, God bless. And may you stay safe and try to stay healthy and away from, and do your best to keep from getting sick. Trust me, it is no fun. Till next time, guys, God bless.